Okay, so let's get started. Today, I hope that you all by now have heard that in the Breonna Taylor civil suit, in the civil case, there has been an historic settlement reached between the city of Louisville, Jefferson County, and the family and estate of Breonna Taylor. It was officially announced about a couple of hours ago, around 2 o'clock p.m., that the city and the city officials had reached an agreement, had reached a settlement agreement with the attorneys on behalf of Breonna Taylor and her family. And so the particulars of that are, first, some police reform, which is the real reason that I am on here, because I think that it has to be discussed, it has to be noted, and I really want you to share this information because it matters and it's important. So there are several different areas of police reform for Jefferson County and for Louisville Metropolitan Police Department, and then a landmark $12 million by way of monetary settlement for the estate of Breonna Taylor. And I believe that Attorney Crump said that they know for sure that's the largest single individual settlement for a police involved shooting case. And they, for sure, for a Black person, they believe for any person, and they're going to check and get back to us with the statistics on that, but it certainly matters. And in the time before we got the official press release, but when people were finding out a settlement's been reached, it's a huge settlement, there's some equitable remedies involved in it, and a big number, I saw people who were online saying, how in the world can it be that there's been a settlement already and there's not been a single arrest in the case, these officers still aren't fired, etc., and so on. And that led me to think that there still is a knowledge vacuum, an information vacuum concerning the manner in which police misconduct cases are handled and the difference between what happens in civil court and what happens in criminal court. So when you look at, and by the way, before I go any further, I want to shout out my brother, Attorney Benjamin Crump, my sister, Attorney Lonita Baker, and my newfound brother, Attorney Aguilar, for the phenomenal work that was done in order to reach this result, which I believe is righteous on behalf of the Breonna Taylor family, her mother, Mrs. Taylor, and all the rest of her family members. Mrs. Palmer, and the rest of her family members. So, and the reason why that's important, as I was saying, is because they were the representatives, the civil rights attorneys, the civil litigation attorneys, whose real job was to get a verdict or settlement on behalf of Breonna Taylor's family in a civil court. That's their only job. That's their only job. So every time you see Attorney Crump or Attorney Baker, both of them, longtime National Bar Association, Ben Crump is past president, Lonita Baker is current board member, always affiliated. Black lawyers matter, right? And this is why, because when you see them doing this work, and they don't just stop at getting done what needs to be done for the family, but they are also social engineers. They are activists. They are trying to get things done that will change a community, that will change a city, a state, a nation. So in a case like this, And I got to tell you, just after all of the years of praying for things to happen, I wept watching the finality of this decision. Because if you look on Twitter, at my pinned tweet, which it's been the same pinned tweet for 5 years now. It was the first time that I was on CNN Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, and we were discussing the Eric Garner settlement. And what I said then is what I'll say now. A settlement or a judgment on behalf of a single family is only justice for that family. It's not justice for that community. It's not justice for our nation. Real justice is systemic change in every area. And I, at that point, mimicked our then president, our last legitimate president, Barack Obama, and said that it has to be community, courtroom, and cell block. We have to see changes in each of these areas, not just one. So when you look at what these lawyers did, and when you look at the way they used their leverage in this case where the shooting was no doubt unjustified, in this case where Breonna Taylor never should have died, and where so many things were done wrong over such a long period of time, what you have to look at, though, is that they could have just taken the money and ran. It would have been right, because their real only obligation is to the family. And the only thing that they could get that would compensate the family for the wrongful death of Breonna Taylor and for her suffering would be money. And they did that. They got the highest amount in a settlement that's ever been achieved for a case like this. So they did that. But what they then also did was insisted upon using this leverage to make for systemic change from now on, according to this settlement. But that you heard the county attorney, let me look at my notes because I want to give you his name, and if you can go back and look at his comments, I suggest that you do. The Jefferson County Attorney Mike O'Connell, his first remarks were to Ms. Palmer and talking about the loss of her child, and he had experienced the loss of a child and he could not imagine, but said he tried to imagine being in her shoes. And then he said they didn't wait to engage Ms. Palmer and her attorneys. And that's what I want to explain to you. For people who have been in here saying, what about arresting the officers? What about what should be done about criminal charges against them? Separate process, separate parties, separate function, separate decision makers, separate outcomes. So many times when you have cases like this where someone has been wrongfully assaulted or killed by police misconduct cases, you have one track for prosecution, which may or may not happen, and then you have a whole other track for civil rights, for civil litigation. And actually within a city or within a county, those things can be running at the same time, but the people who are involved are different. So if you heard the county attorney today, he said, we didn't hesitate to engage with the attorneys on the other side. And I can verify from the minute that this happened, there was conversation between the county attorney's office and the attorneys representing Breonna Taylor's family about resolution of the civil matter. And for those of you who've been following me for any period of time, you know this is kind of like a sweet spot of mine and a passion point of mine. I worked in the Attorney General's office as a senior litigator for over a decade. I worked on these cases on behalf of the municipality. I settled cases just like this. I took cases to trial just like this. I made recommendations on cases like this that came into my office, and the file came on my desk first thing in the morning or middle of the night, and I was writing a settlement request seeking authorization within 24 hours, trying to send it up the chain, because I could see whether these officers ever got prosecuted or not, whether they had the requisite criminal intent to prove up a criminal case or not, that the death was wrongful. And for that, in the civil world, whether I'm on the defense side or the plaintiff side, in that world, justice means compensation to that family. And so I credit the attorneys on behalf of Breonna Taylor's family, and I credit the county attorney's office for getting with the business that needed to be done and reaching a verdict that is reasonable. Now look, I'm gonna say this is a settlement and it is historic, but I don't want anybody to be thinking that this is so far beyond the pale of an amount of money that is justified. We have a heinous action, we have a wrongful death, we have a young woman who was taken out in her 20s, just before even the prime of her life. So we have a mother who will never experience the joy of grandchildren from Breonna. So you have survivors whose lives have been forever changed, not just financially, but in terms of loss of benefit of love and affection and support for however many years she would have lived after that. But what I want to explain to you, if you think about $12 million, this isn't a young woman who was homeless and lacking in education and running drugs and no prospects and fresh out of jail. This is a young woman who had education, who was gainfully employed, who was an essential worker, who was working in the medical profession, who was saving lives on a daily basis, even in the midst of a pandemic, whose life was taken. So the way this calculus works, if it's coming into a county attorney's office or a city attorney's office, and this is actually going to go to trial, they're thinking, what's the possible amount that she could have gained for the rest of her life? Say she was making $50,000 a year for the next 40 years, or $100,000 a year for the next 40 years. That's $4 million just in future earnings. Never mind pain and suffering. So when you think about future earnings, and you don't know, she could have gone on and gotten her PhD. She could have gone on and had some new invention. She could have gone on and started a business and made millions within the next 5 years, 10 years of her life, who knows? So when you think about a life that has been snatched out of this earth and away from her family prematurely, then you have to know that there really is no amount. Even in a case like this, where you have somebody with education, with prospects, who's a contributing member of society, there is no amount that will replace a life. That mother can't get back a daughter. So before we clap too loudly on this $12 million, let's just say that it's right. Let's just say that it's just. Let's say that it's appropriate, but it is appropriate in circumstances in which we never should have been in the first place. And that's why the second part of what's been done is important. We're looking at police reform. We're looking at remedies other than money. We're looking now at where police who are involved in misconduct or have complaints against them. In Louisville now, those things are going to be recorded and there's going to be early action. Let me get the exact term of what they call it. There's going to be an early warning system that tracks use of force incidents that are monitored by a newly created officer of the Inspector General. And I think that that is important. That is important because there are often warning signs when officers have not been properly trained, when officers are out there trigger happy, when officers are out there having anger issues, aggression issues, fear issues, when those things are showing up in the manner in which they're interacting with other citizens. And so the fact that they're going to be monitoring that now, that matters. And the fact that they're signing on the dotted line means they have to do it because the court is going to sign off on this, and then they will be compelled to do it. They're also going to be creating a system where anytime a warrant is going to go for judicial review, before the warrant happens, the commanding officer has to review and approve the warrant. So that's exactly what did not happen here, right? We had these, not line officers, but detectives, part of the investigative unit, that did this warrant, and the warrant, we are finding out now, was insufficient in a number of ways, and they took it to a judge, and the judge signs off on the warrant, and then they go out, and we've got these, no knock provisions, we've got all of these difficult circumstances that made for what happened that night. But if they had had the requirement that commanding officers up the chain had to sign off on it before it could even go to a judge, there would have been a different circumstance. So when we're thinking about things that can save future lives, this matters. And as Senator Harris has called for, and many others have called for, we need these types of provisions nationwide. We need uniform provisions that require reporting on use of force, a nationwide data bank, so we know what officers are doing in real time, so that counties and states are accountable. We need these provisions nationwide that require for people to go and get approval. A rank officer can't just go out and decide tonight's the night that he's gonna play Rambo. We need provisions nationwide that require the use of body cams. Body cams weren't on that night. We might know different information than we know now if that had been a requirement and it had been followed. So these are the types of reforms, the types of systemic changes that do more than money ever can, and do more even than arrest of these individual officers can. And I want to dig in here, and I know it's touchy because we have everybody out saying arrest the officers that killed Breonna Taylor. And I understand that. And I understand that call for that because it matters. It has to be known to individual law enforcement officers who kill our people, that they are going to be held accountable. Not just that they're going to have a slap on the wrist, not that they're just going to be put on administrative leave with pay, not just they're going to lose their jobs, but that they're going to be prosecuted, that the system is not going to protect them such that they aren't prosecuted when they commit a crime. And when you have a license to kill, which is what law enforcement officers have under just circumstances, under circumstances where it is justified, when you have that license, it is precious. It should be held inviolate, and it should be used only when necessary, not when reasonable, but when necessary. And so when you think about wanting officers to be held accountable, I understand why those calls are out there. But I want you to hear me. Whether these officers end up prosecuted or not, these changes that came today because of a civil suit without requirement of city council approval, without requirement of change of state law, but within the body of plaintiffs' attorneys and movement activists and organizers working their will to get justice. These changes are going to prevent future officers in perpetuity from being able to do what happened to Breonna. Do you understand the difference? Like whether a single of those officers is prosecuted and goes to jail or not, because of today, changes have happened. The start of changes, as Attorney Baker said and as Attorney Crump said, the start of changes. More is needed, but a start that will change the system. And I gotta tell you guys, That, as somebody who's seen this from both sides over the past 20 years, is what is called for. Changes that protect the next Breonna. Changes that make for a different outcome for my daughter, for your daughter, for your brother, for my brother. Changes that are going to make for different outcomes across the board. So, do I know that it's not enough? Yes, I do. Do I know that this is just a start? Yes, I do. But I felt like it was important to mark this moment in time where we're seeing a change in the way that business is being done. And I also wanted to make sure you guys understand the prosecutors in this case still have a job to do. So keep calling on David Cameron to do his job. That's not Ben Crump's job. That's not Lonita Baker's job. That's the prosecutor's job. That's the state's attorney's job. That's the independent investigator's job, to make sure that as appropriate, these officers are charged and that there is no shield of protection for their actions. But that's another area where, again, it's the laws that need to be changed. We got to get rid of qualified immunity. It can't be okay for an officer to go out there and freak out and get scared, get hyped up on adrenaline, get in would be a dangerous situation to anybody, but what they're supposed to be trained to do, and just shoot wild. At a minimum, that's recklessness. That's manslaughter. At a minimum, they were supposed to be trained enough to not shoot blind behind a person's office, not even behind a person's apartment, not even be able to see at whom they were aiming or shooting. That's wholly unacceptable. What's going to happen at the front? I don't know. What's going to happen to those officers? Did they knock? Did they announce? I don't know. It's going to be witness testimony that requires investigation. Is an officer justified in shooting back when they're being shot at? Depends on circumstances. We have to free and open our minds to know what just outcomes look like. We perish for lack of knowledge. So I don't want us to be ignorant and then be angry at the wrong people for the wrong things. I want us to be focused on changing a system that has oppressed our people for centuries. That's all I got for now. I'm going to hope to be back on here with the man himself, my brother, Attorney Benjamin Crump. I'll give you a heads up when that's going to happen. But I do want to commend them for their work. And this is a step. This is more progress than people realize under very difficult circumstances. I pray that you all are well. I'll be coming back to talk to you again soon.